The seismograph was screaming. Torvald gripped the edge of the monitoring console and stared at the waveform crawling across the display, its amplitude spiking well beyond anything the instrument had been calibrated to register inside a station. Behind him, two junior analysts from the Confederacy's Geological Survey Division stood frozen at their own terminals, their mandibles half open, antennae pressed flat against their skulls. The waveform was not behaving like a malfunction. It was rhythmic, periodic, steady as planetary rotation. Magnitude, Torvald asked without turning. .04 on the Rithari scale, analyst Druhan said, his voice thin. Sustained, no decay curve. Torvald's secondary, eyes narrowed. .04 was nothing on a planetary surface. On a deep space monitoring station built from composited alloys designed to dampen every microvibration down to thermal noise, it was an event. Their instruments were rated to detect the footfall of a Kesari maintenance drone from 6 decks away. They had never, in the entire operational history of Outpost Kalendra 9, registered a sustained seismic signature from inside the station that was not traced to a mechanical fault. The signature had appeared 41 minutes ago. It had not stopped. Origin point, Torvald said. Medical Bay 7, Druhan answered. Specifically, the examination chamber where they're holding the human. That word landed in the room like a pressure shift. Torvald felt both analysts look at him. He did not look back. He pulled up the corridor sensor logs instead and began scrolling. He was not a geologist. He was not a seismologist. He was, by training and by 23 years of career, a military historian for the Confederacy's Strategic Assessment Bureau. He had been assigned to Kalendra 9 6 days ago, after the human vessel had been interdicted at the border of the Vanassi corridor and its sole occupant, a human female, civilian credentials, no weapons, had been brought aboard for processing. The Bureau wanted a historian present because the human was the first live specimen the Confederacy had obtained since the Compact of Yathori, and Torvald's particular specialty was the history of species that had been systematically underestimated. He had studied the existing literature. He had read every after-action report, every intelligence brief, every diplomatic summary that mentioned humans. Most of it was second-hand. Some of it was contradictory. All of it carried the same buried subtext. The authors were afraid of something they could not name. Now the seismograph was telling him what it was. Pull the waveform signature and overlay it against the Rithari standard geological templates, Torvald said. Every template in the library. Tectonic, volcanic, subsurface detonation, structural failure. All of them. Sir, it's not going to match any geological. Do it. Druhan did it. The overlay took 11 seconds. The result populated the screen in clean categorical text, and Torvald read it twice to make sure he was not misinterpreting. Classification: tectonic microevent sustained. Confidence: 94.2%. Pattern match: low-frequency periodic compression wave. Comparable analog: subsurface magma pulse, pre-eruptive stage class II. It's classifying her heartbeat as a geological event, Druhan said. His voice had gone very quiet. That's, sir, the instruments think there's a magma chamber forming under Medical Bay 7. Torvald stared at the classification for a long moment. Then he opened a new file on his personal terminal, time-stamped it, and began writing. He had been keeping field notes since he arrived. It was habit and it was duty. The Strategic Assessment Bureau did not send historians into the field to observe. It sent them to build threat models. Torvald's job was to watch, to record, and to determine whether the existing classification of humans, Category 4, moderate strategic concern, limited threat outside their home system, was accurate. On his first day, he had believed the classification was probably correct. Humans were small, bipedal, no natural armor, no venom apparatus, no electromagnetic sensory organs, no distributed nervous system. Their homeworld was a mid-range terrestrial body with unremarkable solar parameters. They had achieved interstellar capability only within the last 2 centuries of their civilization, which placed them solidly in the developmental middle of the galactic census. There was nothing in the initial assessment that suggested they warranted special concern. On his second day, he had begun to revise. The human, her name was Dr. Kira Vasquez, and she had identified herself as a geothermal engineer returning from a contract deployment, had been placed in Medical Bay 7 for standard intake processing. The Confederacy's protocols for new species contact were thorough and clinical: biometric scanning, atmospheric compatibility, toxicology baseline. The medical staff, a team of 4 Oricinid physicians led by Chief Medical Officer Pale Sathan, had approached the process with routine professionalism. The first anomaly appeared during the cardiovascular scan. Torvon had been present in the observation gallery above the examination chamber, watching through the reinforced transparency. The human sat on the edge of the examination platform, her legs dangling, her expression calm. She had been cooperative since boarding. She had not raised her voice, not demanded release, not threatened. She had answered questions in fluent Confederacy standard with a slight accent that Torvon's translation software could not place, and she had submitted to every scan without objection. Her posture was relaxed. Her hands were folded in her lap. She looked to Torvon's eyes, mildly bored. The cardiovascular scan took 19 seconds. When the results populated Chief Physician Sathan's display, every physician in the room stopped moving. Torvon had zoomed his observation feed to read the display. The numbers were simple: resting cardiac output, 5.2 liters per minute. Systolic pressure, 122 millimeters of mercury. Heart rate, 68 beats per minute. Peak force per cardiac contraction, 1.2 watts. Those numbers meant nothing to Torvon initially. He had recorded them and moved on. It was not until later that evening, when he cross-referenced them against the Confederacy's comparative xenophysiology database, that the scale became clear. The average resting cardiac output for the 37 known spacefaring species in the Confederacy was 0.4 liters per minute. The human's heart was pumping 13 times the volume. Her blood pressure was operating at a level that would constitute a medical emergency in every species on file. Her heart was not beating, it was detonating. 68 controlled explosions per minute inside her chest, each one driving a pressure wave through a vascular system that would have ruptured every blood vessel in a Venasi body within seconds. And she was sitting there, legs dangling, looking bored. Torvon had written in his notes that night, "The human cardiovascular system does not circulate fluid, it propels it under force. The distinction matters." He had then pulled the cardiovascular data for every species in the Confederacy's combat registry, all 41, including the 12 that had been granted observer status and the 3 that had been classified as extinct and wild. None of them came close. The nearest analog was the Corvathi, a heavy-gravity species with a distributed pump system that moved fluid through 6 parallel chambers. Their combined output was 1.9 liters per minute. The human's single organ, a fist-sized muscle in the center of her chest, exceeded their entire distributed system by a factor of nearly 3. And the Corvathi were classified as Category 7, extreme threat, weapons restricted in all Confederacy space. The human, with her Category 4 classification and her civilian credentials, was pumping blood at a rate that would have earned any other species an automatic escalation to the highest threat tier in the Confederacy's taxonomy. Nobody had noticed because nobody had measured a live human in a controlled setting since before the Yathori Compact. The literature was all second-hand. The numbers were all estimated, and the estimates had been wrong. The second anomaly appeared on day 3. The structural monitoring system for Deck 14, the deck that housed Medical Bay 7, began registering periodic microvibrations. The maintenance team assumed a mechanical fault. They ran diagnostics on the ventilation system, the gravity plating, the power conduits, the waste recycling pumps, and the emergency bulkhead actuators. Everything checked clean. The vibrations persisted. They were low frequency, rhythmic, and they propagated through the deck plating in a pattern that the monitoring AI classified as biological in origin, source unidentified. The maintenance chief, a Venasi named Oris Pell, filed 3 separate work orders over the course of the morning. Each one concluded with the same annotation: source not located, vibration persists, recommend deep structural scan. The deep structural scan was scheduled for the following day. It would not be needed. Torvald had been in the observation gallery when Chief Physician Sothen made the connection. The medical team had been running a locomotion assessment, standard procedure, measuring the human's gait, stride length, and ground reaction forces as she walked a 10-meter path in the examination chamber. Dr. Vasquez walked the path 6 times, back and forth, at what she described as a normal pace. She swung her arms slightly as she walked. She hummed under her breath. She looked like someone crossing a parking structure. The ground reaction force sensors in the chamber floor registered each footfall. The numbers appeared on Sothen's display. Torvald watched the chief physician's face change. Peak ground reaction force per footstep, normal walking pace, 1.1 times body mass. Sothen had pulled up the comparative database without being asked. Torvald watched the comparison populate. For the Venasi, the Confederacy's most physically robust species, evolved on a 0.7 gravity world. Peak ground reaction force during normal locomotion was 0.3 times body mass. For the Kesari, 0.2. For the Oricinid physicians themselves, 0.15. The human was hitting the floor with nearly 4 times the force of the Confederacy's strongest species, and she was walking, not running, not jumping, walking with the easy, unhurried gait of someone crossing a room to get water. Sothen had turned to the observation gallery and looked directly at Torvald. The chief physician's 6 eyes were wide, and 3 of his 4 hands were pressed flat against his thorax in the Oricinid gesture that meant, "I need to speak with you privately. This is urgent." They had met in the corridor outside. Sothen's voice was low and controlled. Military historian says, "I need you to understand what I am about to tell you. Go ahead." Every time that human takes a step, the floor registers it as an impact event. Her body generates force during routine locomotion that exceeds the structural loading assumptions for this deck. Our floors were built to accommodate species weighing up to 600 kilograms. She weighs 71. The issue is not mass. The issue is that her musculoskeletal system delivers force in a way our engineering models do not account for. She is not heavy. She is percussive. Define percussive. Her locomotion is a controlled fall. Each stride is an arrested collapse. Her skeleton absorbs and redirects impact forces through a system of, I am still reviewing the scan data, through dense, mineralized bone tissue, layered connective structures, fluid-filled joint capsules, and elastic tendons that store and release kinetic energy. The net result is that she strikes the ground with each step, absorbs the rebound, and converts it into forward motion. It is not walking as we understand it. It is a series of managed collisions. Torvald had recorded every word. He had gone back to his quarters and spent 4 hours reviewing the xenophysiology literature on human locomotion. What he found there matched Sothen's description and expanded it into something worse. Human bipedal locomotion was, biomechanically, one of the most energy-efficient forms of sustained terrestrial movement in the known galaxy. It was also one of the most violent. Every step was a controlled impact. The human body was built to absorb that impact, not to avoid it. Their bones were denser than the structural members in Confederacy light armor plating. Their tendons stored mechanical energy and released it like springs. Their muscles contracted with a force-to-mass ratio that exceeded purpose-built actuators in military-grade exoskeletons. And they did this continuously, without rest, without apparent effort. The average human, according to the data Torvon compiled, took approximately 8,000 steps per day, 8,000 controlled collisions, 8,000 seismic microevents every single day from the age of approximately 1 year until death, which for humans occurred at roughly 80 to 90 years. The cumulative total was staggering. Over a human lifetime, each individual struck the ground approximately 200 million times. In his notes, Torvon had written, "They are not walking. They are striking the ground 8,000 times per day, and the ground gives way, and they do not notice." He had then added, "We evolved to glide, to slide, to distribute weight across broad, soft contact surfaces. We do not strike the ground. The concept would be alien to every species in the Confederacy. To strike the ground would be to damage ourselves. To them, it is locomotion." The third anomaly was the voice. Day 4. The medical team had been conducting a respiratory assessment, lung capacity, airflow velocity, vocal cord frequency range, exhaled atmospheric composition. Dr. Vasquez had been asked to vocalize at various volumes for calibration purposes. She spoke in normal conversational tones. She hummed a melody she said was from her childhood. At Sothen's request, she raised her voice to what she called a shout, not in anger, not in distress, simply to demonstrate her vocal range. The acoustic sensors in the examination chamber registered the shout at 94 decibels. The atmospheric pressure monitors detected a measurable compression wave radiating from her mouth. 3 of the 4 physicians flinched. One, a junior named Kathinari, took 2 involuntary steps backward, his lower limbs trembling. Sothen had been prepared for elevated readings. He was not prepared for what the frequency analysis revealed. Human vocal output did not merely carry sound. It carried subharmonics, low-frequency vibrations that propagated through solid materials, through the floor, through the walls, through the examination platform. When Dr. Vasquez spoke in normal conversational tones, her voice generated a subsonic signature that the station's structural monitoring system classified as acoustic microtremor activity. When she shouted, the signature crossed the threshold into what the system categorized as a minor seismic event. The monitoring AI, which had been designed to track geological activity on planetary surfaces and structural integrity on deep space installations, did not have a classification category for a biological organism that generated seismic scale vibrations through vocalization. It did what it was programmed to do. It classified the event according to the closest analog in its database. Classification: acoustic seismic hybrid event. Comparable analog: deep ocean volcanic vent eruption, class I. Note: biological origin. No matching template in current database. Sothen had ordered the junior physician out of the room after that. Kathinari's trembling had not stopped. The young oricinids' vibration-sensitive palps, the sensory organs that all oricinids used for spatial awareness and communication, had been overwhelmed. He was, in the clinical terminology, experiencing sensory flooding. The human's voice had triggered his threat detection reflexes at a level normally associated with tectonic events. Dr. Vasquez had watched him leave with an expression of mild concern. "Is he all right?" she asked. "He will be," Sothen said. "Please continue at your previous volume." "I didn't mean to scare him," she said. "I was just talking." Torvon wrote in his notes, "She was just talking." That sentence should be entered into the historical record exactly as spoken. Day 4 Addendum. The medical team attached surface electrodes to Dr. Vasquez's skeletal muscles to measure resting electrical activity. Human skeletal muscle, even at complete rest, maintained a baseline level of electrical discharge in microcontractions, neural maintenance pulses, what human physicians apparently called muscle tone. These microcontractions were invisible to the human. She was not aware of them. They were autonomous, unconscious, constant. They generated vibrations. The station's structural sensors detected them, not as dramatic events, as a persistent, low-amplitude hum that propagated through any surface the human was in contact with. When she sat on the examination platform, the platform hummed. When she lay down for the full-body scan, the scanning bed hummed. When she placed her hand flat on the console during a conversation, the console hummed. Sathan ran the muscle tone measurements 3 times because the first 2 results seemed like instrument error. They were not. The human's resting musculature discharged at a frequency, an amplitude that the Confederacy's own biomedical equipment classified as active contraction. In any orocinid patient, the readings would indicate a severe neurological disorder, involuntary muscle activation, uncontrolled spasm, requiring immediate intervention. In the human, it was resting state. It was what her muscles did when she was doing nothing. The maintenance team, still investigating the vibrations on Deck 14, finally traced the source. It was the human. It had always been the human. She was generating a continuous microseismic field simply by existing, by having a heartbeat, by breathing, by maintaining the baseline neural activity that kept her body alive. She was radiating low-frequency vibrations into the station's structure the way a heat source radiated thermal energy. It was passive. It was constant. It was as involuntary as body temperature. Commander Yair Talo, the station's commanding officer, called a senior staff meeting that evening. Torvan attended as the Bureau's representative. Sathan presented the biometric findings. Chief Engineer Mausa Ironik presented the structural monitoring data. Maintenance Chief Oris Pell presented his 3 work orders and the conclusion that the vibration source was biological and could not be repaired. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. The relevant exchange lasted 3. "What you are telling me," Commander Talo said, her voice careful, "is that the human is generating structural vibrations throughout Deck 14 by sitting in a room." "By existing in a room," Sathan corrected. "Her cardiovascular system generates periodic compression waves. Her respiratory system generates low-frequency oscillation. Her musculature generates continuous microtremors. Her locomotion generates impact forces. Her vocalization generates acoustic seismic hybrid events. Each of these, individually, falls within our structural tolerances. Collectively, they create a persistent vibration field that our monitoring systems were not designed to filter, because no known biological organism has ever produced one. Can we dampen it? We would need to isolate the entire deck. Vibration dampening barriers on all structural members, bulkheads, and deck plating. It would require a refit. For one human. For one resting human, Commander. She has not exerted herself since boarding. She has not run, jumped, struck anything, or vocalized above conversational volume except once briefly at our request. Every reading we have is baseline. Chief Engineer Ironik spoke up. "Commander, I want to add that the vibration propagation pattern is unusual. It follows the structural frame, not the atmospheric channels. She is not making noise that travels through the air. She is transmitting force that travels through the metal. When she sits on a chair, the chair becomes a transmission node. When she walks on the floor becomes a waveguide. Her body is mechanically coupling to our infrastructure." "In what sense?" "In the sense that the station is ringing, Commander, faintly, continuously, at a frequency set by a human heartbeat." The silence that followed was the kind Torvan had learned to recognize in his career, the silence of strategic reassessment. It was the sound of a room full of experienced officers, realizing that the threat model they had been operating under was wrong by an order of magnitude. Torvan spoke into it. "I would like to review the Yathori Compact engagement records." Every eye in the room turned to him. The Yathori Compact was the last military action between the Confederacy and human forces. It had occurred 11 years ago, had lasted 9 days, and had ended in a negotiated ceasefire. The Confederacy's official assessment classified it as an inconclusive border dispute. The classified assessment, which Torvon had access to, described it as a strategic withdrawal after unacceptable losses. Why? Commander Talo asked. Because we fought humans at Yathori, and afterward we reclassified them from Category 3 to Category 4, which reduced their threat assessment. I now believe that reclassification was based on incomplete data. Explain. The reclassification was based on casualty analysis. Our forces suffered higher losses than projected, but the human forces also sustained significant casualties, which led the assessment board to conclude that humans were powerful but not disproportionately so. They fought hard, we fought hard, the result was inconclusive. Category 4. He paused. That assessment assumed the humans were fighting at full capacity. Chief Physician Sathan has just demonstrated that the human in our medical bay is generating seismic-level biomechanical output while sitting still and being bored. If a resting state produces readings that our instruments classify as geological events, then the operational capacity we observed at Yathori was not full capacity. It was not even close. Another silence. What are you suggesting? Talo said. I am suggesting that at Yathori the humans were walking, and we mistook it for their best effort. Torvon's request to review the Yathori records was approved within the hour. He spent the next 16 hours in his quarters, cross-referencing the engagement data with Sathan's biometric findings. The pattern emerged fast. The Confederacy's ground forces at Yathori had reported persistent equipment malfunctions during close engagements with human infantry. Vibration-sensitive targeting systems lost calibration. Seismic motion detectors, designed to track enemy movement through ground vibrations, had been rendered useless. They had registered so many false positives that field commanders had ordered them shut down within the first 3 hours of contact. The intelligence assessment at the time had attributed these failures to human electronic warfare, some kind of jamming device. No such device had been recovered from the battlefield or identified in human equipment manifests. The assessment board had noted the discrepancy and filed it as unresolved. Torvon now knew what had happened. There was no jamming device. The humans themselves were the interference. A squad of 12 human soldiers walking across a field generated enough microseismic activity to overwhelm sensors designed to detect the footfalls of entire Confederacy armor columns. The sensors had not malfunctioned. They had been doing exactly what they were built to do. They were detecting ground vibrations and classifying them as approaching threats. The problem was that the vibrations were real, and they were coming from every direction, and they did not stop. He pulled the engagement records for the Battle of Yathori Ridge, the compact's decisive ground engagement. The Confederacy had deployed the 14th Armored Division, heavy vehicles, seismic network targeting, terrain-mapped fire control. The division had been considered overwhelming for the engagement. 12,000 troops, supported by 600 armored platforms, against a human garrison of 800. The 14th had lost 31% of its operational strength in 9 hours. The after-action review blamed terrain, communications failures, and human unconventional tactics. Torvon reread the communications failure section with Sathan's data open on the adjacent screen. The division's communications backbone ran on vibration-modulated carrier waves, a standard Confederacy military technology, reliable across all known operating environments. At Yathori, the carrier signal had degraded progressively as the division advanced toward the human positions. By the time the lead elements engaged, the signal-to-noise ratio had collapsed. Platoons lost contact with companies. Companies lost contact with battalions. The division fought the last 4 hours of the engagement in effective isolation, each unit operating on local initiative, without coordinated fire support. The communications team had attributed the degradation to atmospheric interference from Ythori's unusually active magnetosphere. Torvald now understood the truth. The carrier signal had degraded because the medium through which it traveled, the ground, was saturated with vibrations generated by 800 human soldiers, 800 heartbeats, 800 sets of footsteps, 800 sets of lungs compressing and expanding. The humans had not jammed the signal. They had drowned it out. They had drowned it out by existing. The human soldiers at Ythori had not deployed electronic countermeasures. They had deployed feet. There was more. Torvald kept reading. The ground forces had also reported a phenomenon they called sympathetic detonation. Ammunition and ordnance stored in ground-level depots near human positions had experienced anomalous failure rates. Fuses designed to withstand battlefield conditions had triggered prematurely. Seismic-sensitive charges had armed themselves without command input. The Logistics Corps had attributed this to environmental conditions on Ythori, the planet's geological instability. Torvald now understood that the geological instability was infantry. Human infantry, walking, running, digging foxholes, sleeping in them, pumping enough vibrational energy into the ground to destabilize equipment designed for stable world deployment. He found one field report from a junior supply officer that made his antennae flatten against his skull. The officer had been stationed at a forward supply depot, 300 meters behind the front line. His report documented the progressive failure of 6 Class II seismic fuses over 2 days. Each fuse had armed and detonated without command input. Each detonation had destroyed munitions earmarked for counter-battery fire. The supply officer had noted, with dry understatement, that the depot's geological survey showed no tectonic activity in the region. Of course it didn't, Torvald thought. The tectonic activity was wearing boots. He found another report, this one from a field medic. The medics unit had attempted to establish a field hospital in a hardened bunker complex 2 kilometers from the primary human position. The bunker's medical equipment included vibration-calibrated surgical instruments, precision tools designed to operate in the stable, dampened environment of a Confederacy military installation. Within 4 hours of activation, every instrument in the suite had required recalibration. Within 8 hours, 3 had been retired from service due to irreparable drift. The medic had blamed power fluctuations, but the power supply logs showed clean, stable output throughout the period. The instruments had not failed because of electrical noise. They had failed because the ground beneath the hospital was vibrating at a level that exceeded their operational tolerance. The vibrations were coming from 2 kilometers away, from a garrison of 800 humans going about the ordinary business of being alive on a planet that they were, in the most literal sense possible, shaking. 2 kilometers, 800 humans, that was the radius of effect. That was the contamination zone, not a weapon, not a device, a heartbeat, 800 of them. Torvald closed the engagement records. He sat in the dark of his quarters for a long time, recalibrating everything he thought he knew about the compact of Ythori. The engagement had lasted 9 days. The Confederacy had committed 12,000 troops. The humans had committed 800. The Confederacy had withdrawn after suffering 31% casualties, a rate that would end most commanders' careers. But the number that mattered was not the casualty rate. It was the ratio, 800 to 12,000, 15 to 1. And the 800 had won not by being better soldiers necessarily, though they may have been. They had won in part because their mere presence on the battlefield had degraded the Confederacy's sensor network, destabilized its communications backbone, disrupted its supply chain, and compromised the precision of its medical equipment. 800 humans, performing baseline biological functions, breathing, walking, sleeping, had rendered a technologically superior force partially blind, partially deaf, and partially incapable of treating its own wounded. They had won a material advantage by existing. Torvald compiled the cross-reference into a preliminary report and transmitted it to the Bureau. Then he went back to the observation gallery. Dr. Vasquez was asleep. She lay on the examination platform, one arm folded under her head, breathing slowly and evenly. The medical bay was otherwise empty. The duty physician had stepped out, and the monitoring was automated. Torvald stood at the transparency and watched the sleeping human, and he watched the real-time seismograph feed on the console beside him. The waveform was still there. Slower now, her heart rate had dropped to the low 50s, the baseline deceleration that humans experience during deep sleep. The amplitude had decreased, the frequency had shifted, but it had not stopped. Even in sleep, her heart continued to drive pressure waves through the examination platform, through the deck plating, through the structural members of the station. Even in sleep, her respiratory cycle generated low-frequency oscillation. Even in sleep, her muscles maintained their autonomous microcontractions, humming faintly through every surface she touched. She was the quietest she would ever be, and she was still registering on a seismograph. Torvald thought about the implications. He thought about them the way a military historian thought about implications, not in terms of one human on one station, but in terms of what one human on one station revealed about the species. There were, according to the most recent census data, approximately 11 billion humans on their homeworld. 11 billion organisms, each generating a continuous microseismic field, each striking the ground 8,000 times per day, each driving a heart that the Confederacy's instruments classified as a tectonic event. The surface of their planet was not a habitat. It was an anvil. It was being struck 11 billion times simultaneously, continuously, and had been for the entire duration of their species' existence. And they built cities on it. They built towers and bridges and roads and tunnels, and all of it sat on a planetary surface that was being percussively loaded by 11 billion walking, breathing, heart-beating organisms who did not notice the vibrations because the vibrations were them. Torvald opened a new section in his report and titled it Strategic Reassessment, Human Biometrical Threat Profile. The next morning, Commander Talo ordered a series of controlled tests. Torvald was present for all of them. So was Chief Engineer Ironik, who had installed additional structural monitoring equipment in the examination chamber overnight and now sat at a portable workstation with real-time stress analysis running on 3 displays. Test 1. Locomotion under increased effort. Dr. Vasquez was asked to jog in place for 30 seconds. She complied with a small smile and a comment that she usually preferred a longer warm-up. The ground reaction force sensors peaked at 2.8 times body mass. The structural monitoring system flagged the event as a localized seismic anomaly and recommended an engineering inspection. On Ironic's stress analysis display, the floor plating beneath Dr. Vasquez's feet showed a transient deformation of 0.003 millimeters, invisible to the eye, measurable to the instruments, and 3 times the maximum transient deformation the plating was rated for under personnel loading. She was jogging, Ironik said mostly to himself, not running, jogging in place. Test 2. Sustained walking corridor length. Dr. Vasquez was asked to walk a 50-meter stretch of corridor on Deck 14 at normal pace. Security personnel cleared the corridor in advance. Ironik had placed vibration sensors at 10-meter intervals along the floor, walls, and ceiling. As Dr. Vasquez walked, each sensor activated in sequence, registering her approach like a wavefront. The corridor lit up on Ironik's display as a propagating seismic pulse, moving at walking speed, attenuating slowly, each footfall adding to the residual vibration from the last. By the time she reached the end of the corridor, the far end, where she had started, was still vibrating from her first steps. The vibrations overlapped and built on each other, constructing a standing wave pattern in the corridor's structural members. The corridor, for the duration of her walk, had been resonating. "This is why the whole deck reads anomalous," Ironix said. "She walks back and forth in that examination room, and each pass builds on the previous one. The room accumulates her. The metal remembers her footsteps." Test 3. Vocalization under increased volume. Dr. Vasquez was asked to call out as if summoning someone at a distance, what she called a yell, not a scream. She cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted a single word. The acoustic sensors registered 111 decibels. The atmospheric compression wave rattled instruments on adjacent workstations. The subsonic component propagated through 2 decks before attenuating below detection threshold. Analyst Druhan, who had been monitoring from the seismology lab on Deck 12, reported that his instruments detected the event. Deck 12 was 3 decks away from Medical Bay 7. Test 4. Impact Force. Sathan asked Dr. Vasquez to strike a calibrated force measurement pad with her open palm. "Not hard," Sathan specified. "Normal effort." She shrugged and slapped the pad the way, she said, she would slap a table to get someone's attention. The force gauge registered 412 newtons. Sathan stared at the reading. He ran it again. Same result. He asked Dr. Vasquez what she would classify that level of effort as on a scale of 1 to 10. "Maybe a 2, she said. "I wasn't really trying." Sathan did not ask her to try. He canceled the remaining impact tests and asked the security officer on duty to clear the corridor outside the medical bay. He did this quietly, without explaining why, and the security officer complied without asking. In the observation gallery, Torvon noted the cancellation and the corridor clearing in his field log. He added a personal annotation. "Sathan is afraid. Not of Dr. Vasquez. She has been nothing but cooperative. He is afraid of what a full-effort reading would mean for the threat model. He is afraid of the number." Test 5 added by Ironix, resonance mapping. The chief engineer asked Dr. Vasquez to stand still on a steel plate and simply exist. "Just stand there," he said, "and don't move." She stood. She breathed. Her heart beat. After 60 seconds, Ironix instruments had mapped a complete vibration profile of the plate. Her body, standing motionless, had induced a resonance pattern in a steel plate that matched the signature of a running industrial compressor. Ironix stared at the data for a long time. Then he asked Dr. Vasquez if she knew how much her body vibrated. She blinked. "I don't vibrate," she said. "You do," Ironix said. "Continuously, measurably. You have been vibrating since you came aboard, and you have not stopped once." She looked at her own hand. She held it up and watched it, steady and still, the hand of a professional engineer accustomed to precision work. No tremor, no visible movement. "I feel completely still," she said. Ironix looked at the resonance profile on his display. The jagged, active, continuously oscillating waveform that was this woman standing motionless. "I know," he said. The montage of perspectives widened. Over the next 2 days, Torvon interviewed 9 members of the station's crew who had interacted with Dr. Vasquez. He conducted each interview in the same small briefing room on Deck 10, with the same recorder, using the same opening question. "Describe your experience." Lieutenant Vashan Rel, Security Detail, Day Watch. She shook my hand when I escorted her from the docking bay. Standard greeting for humans, apparently. She gripped and released. It lasted perhaps 1 second. My wrist ached for the rest of the shift. Not from pressure, she was gentle, I could tell. From the vibration. Her hand was warm and it was vibrating, like touching an active power conduit except organic. My bones buzzed for an hour afterward. I ran a medical check on myself because I thought something was wrong. The physician said my skeletal resonance had been temporarily disrupted, from a handshake. Technician Sari Ullon, Environmental Systems, Deck 14. I was running a routine atmospheric check in the corridor outside Medical Bay 7. The human was inside, talking with the physician, conversational volume, nothing elevated. I could feel her voice through the floor, not hear feel, through the soles of my feet. My vibration palps interpreted it as approaching heavy equipment. I filed a maintenance alert before I realized it was her. When I did realize, I filed a corrected report, and then I stood there for a moment trying to understand how a living thing's speaking voice could feel like a cargo loader. Corporal D.M. Tashi, security detail, night watch. I stood guard outside her room for a 6-hour shift. She slept the entire time. The door was closed, the corridor was silent. I could feel her heartbeat through the bulkhead. I pressed my palm against the wall and felt the pulse. 63 per minute. I counted. I stood there for 6 hours feeling a heartbeat through a reinforced bulkhead, and by the end of my shift I had filed a request for transfer. I do not want to be near her. She has done nothing wrong. She has been polite. I do not want to be near something whose heart I can feel through a wall. Nutritionist Peven R., galley staff. She ate with us in the general mess on day 5. Sat at the end of a standard composite table, ate the modified ration we prepared. She tapped her fingers on the table while she waited, an idle habit, she said. The tap pattern registered on the vibration monitors in the galley's structural assessment panel. It classified the tapping as a repetitive impact event consistent with light-duty machining. She was drumming her fingers. The station thought someone was operating a drill press. Chief Engineer Mausa Ironik, Structural Integrity. I've been running structural assessments on Deck 14 since the vibrations started. The cumulative microloading from the human's presence has produced measurable material fatigue in the floor plating directly beneath her examination room. We are talking about composited alloy rated for a 30-year service life under normal operational conditions. She has been here 6 days. 6 days of her heartbeat, her breathing, her walking back and forth in a 12-meter room, and the floor plating is showing early-stage fatigue signatures that would normally appear at year 4 of operational use. I have recommended that if she remains aboard longer than 20 days, we reinforce the deck. If she remains longer than 60, we replace the plating. Junior Physician Kath Inari, medical staff on medical leave since day 4. My vibration palps have not returned to normal sensitivity. The chief physician tells me they will, but the recovery timeline is uncertain. When she shouted during the vocal assessment, my palps registered it as a pressure wave consistent with, I don't know how to describe this in non-technical terms. My body interpreted her voice as an earthquake, not metaphorically. My nervous system, which evolved over 400 million years to detect and flee seismic events, received her voice and told me the ground was collapsing. That is what a human sounds like to an oricynid at the neurological level, a walking, talking seismic event. I have been having nightmares about vibrations. I wake up convinced the station is breaking apart. It is not. It is the memory of her voice in my sensory system replaying. Navigation Officer Thelen Voss, bridge crew, no direct contact. I have not met the human. I have not entered Deck 14. I do not need to. I can see her on the structural monitoring feed from the bridge. She appears as a persistent anomaly, a small, localized vibration source that moves when she moves and pulses when she is still. She looks, on our instruments, the way a deep ocean thermal vent looks on a planetary survey scan, a point source of continuous mechanical energy. I watch her on the bridge feed the way I would watch a geological hazard, with distance, with attention, with the understanding that she is not doing anything wrong, and that what she is doing without trying is enough. Maintenance Chief Oris Pell, Deck 14. You know what bothers me the most? Not the vibrations, not the structural readings, not the fatigue numbers. What bothers me is the water glass. She keeps a glass of water on the table beside her examination platform. Standard issue Confederacy drinking vessel. I walked past the observation window on my way to a junction panel and I looked in, and the water in her glass was moving, rippling. In concentric circles from the center outward at a regular interval. Her heartbeat was moving the water in a glass that was sitting on a table 3 meters from her body. She was reading a data pad. She did not notice. The water has been doing that for 6 days, and she has never once noticed. Quartermaster 2nd Grade Veli Ash Supply Division Single Interaction. I delivered a replacement uniform kit to her room. She opened the door and thanked me. When she said thank you, I felt it in my chest, not emotionally, physically. The low frequencies in her voice resonated in my thoracic cavity. For a moment I thought I was having a cardiac event. My vision blurred. My legs weakened. I handed her the kit and I left. And I did not realize until I was back at my station that she had spoken 2 words at a completely normal volume, and my body had interpreted them as a threat to my life. Torvald compiled the interviews and added them to his report. He spent 2 hours rereading the entire document from the beginning, and then he did something he had not done in 23 years of service. He added a personal assessment section. The Bureau's guidelines were clear. Field reports were empirical. Facts, measurements, direct observations. Personal assessments were filed separately, if at all, and they were understood to be career risks. A military historian who inserted his own analysis into a field report was a military historian who was either supremely confident or supremely unsettled. Torvald was both. He wrote, Personal Assessment, Military Historian TORVANSESS, Strategic Assessment Bureau. The Confederacy's current threat classification for humans is Category 4, Moderate Strategic Concern, Limited Threat Outside Home System. This classification is based primarily on the outcome of the Ithori Compact engagement, which was assessed as demonstrating human military capability at or near its operational ceiling. I now believe this classification is incorrect by a factor that I am not qualified to estimate. The human detained aboard Calendra 9 is a civilian. She is a geothermal engineer. She has no military training, no augmentation, no combat experience that she has disclosed. She is, by her own account, an ordinary representative of her species. Her ordinary resting heartbeat registers as a tectonic event on our instruments. Her ordinary walking pace generates impact forces that exceed our structural engineering assumptions. Her ordinary speaking voice propagates through solid material as a seismic wave. Her ordinary presence causes measurable material fatigue in military-grade composited alloy within days. She is not aware of any of this. She does not know that she is shaking the station. She does not know that her heartbeat can be felt through bulkheads. She does not know that her footsteps overloaded our ground motion sensors. She does not know that her voice caused neurological distress in a physician whose species evolved to detect earthquakes. She thinks she is being quiet. The implications for the Ithori reassessment are as follows. If an ordinary human civilian generates this level of biomechanical output at rest, then the soldiers we fought at Ithori were not operating at peak capacity. They were walking. The equipment failures we experienced were not electronic warfare. They were the natural biomechanical signature of human infantry. Our seismic sensors did not malfunction. They were overwhelmed by the simple physical reality of humans moving across a surface. I must also note the following observations from casual conversation with the detainee. These were not elicited through formal questioning. They emerged naturally during meals, during scan procedures, during the idle periods between assessments. Dr. Vasquez volunteered them without prompting, without emphasis, as unremarkable background facts about her species. Each one has been independently verified against the Confederacy's Human Cultural Database. During her stay, Dr. Vasquez has mentioned, in casual conversation, that humans on her homeworld engage in an activity called running, which she described as locomotion at elevated speed sustained over long distances. She stated that competitive human runners regularly sustain this activity for 2 to 4 hours at speeds exceeding 15 kilometers per hour. She described this as a common recreational pursuit. When asked whether running produced greater ground impact forces than walking, she said, "Of course, maybe 3 or 4 times more." She said this the way one might note that rain is wetter than mist. When asked how many humans engaged in this activity, she estimated hundreds of millions regularly. She also mentioned an activity called dancing, in which large groups of humans simultaneously strike the ground with their feet in rhythmic patterns, often for hours, often in enclosed structures. She said this was done for enjoyment. She described a human physiological phenomenon called a sneeze, in which the respiratory system expels air at velocities exceeding 150 kilometers per hour in an uncontrolled burst. She said this happens involuntarily, multiple times per day, and that humans consider it a minor inconvenience. She described the human infant, a developmental stage lasting approximately 1 year after birth, during which the immature human generates continuous high-amplitude vocalizations at irregular intervals, sometimes for hours, in a frequency range specifically optimized to be impossible to ignore. She said this was normal, and that human parents endured it without significant distress. She described an activity called applause, in which a room full of humans simultaneously and repeatedly strike their own hands together to produce a collective percussive sound as an expression of approval. She said this could involve thousands of individuals in a single venue. She said the acoustic output of a large human crowd engaged in applause could reach 130 decibels, a level that, on the Confederacy's medical reference chart, is classified as causing immediate and permanent auditory damage in all known species. She described an event called a concert, in which tens of thousands of humans gather in a single structure and simultaneously vocalize, strike the ground with their feet, and generate rhythmic impact forces in coordination with amplified acoustic output from specialized equipment. She said these events lasted for hours and were attended voluntarily, enthusiastically, repeatedly. She said the largest such gatherings involved over 100,000 individuals. She appeared amused when she described them. I asked Dr. Vasquez during one of these conversations whether she was aware that her heartbeat was audible to our instruments from 3 decks away. She was not. I told her. She looked at her own chest, placed her hand over it, felt the beat and said, "Huh, I forget it's even there most of the time." She forgets. She forgets that there is a controlled detonation happening inside her chest 68 times per minute, driving pressure waves through every surface she touches, shaking the metal of a military station, registering on instruments designed to detect volcanic activity. She forgets because she has never lived in a world where a heartbeat was noteworthy. Each of these details was offered casually, without emphasis, as background information about her species. She did not appear to understand that any of them were remarkable. I submit this assessment with the recommendation that the Confederacy's threat classification for humans be revised immediately. The current classification is not merely outdated, it is dangerously wrong. It was built on the assumption that the humans we observed at Yethori were performing at capacity. They were not. They were walking, and walking alone was enough to disable our ground sensor network across an entire theater of operations. I do not know what running looks like on our instruments. I do not want to find out from the field. I recommend, in the strongest terms available to a historian who has spent his career studying the last hours of civilizations that made this precise mistake, that we do not give them a reason to run. Torvald filed the report at 3:40 station time. He sat at his desk for a long time after the transmission confirmation came back. The station was in its night cycle. The corridors were dim. The environmental systems hummed at reduced output. Through the bulkhead behind his desk, faintly he could feel it, a rhythm, slow and steady, 63 beats per minute, give or take. The sleeping heartbeat of a human woman 3 decks below him, conducted through composited military-grade alloy, through structural members designed to withstand weapons fire, through the reinforced flooring of his own quarters. She was asleep. She was not trying to frighten anyone. She was not trying to demonstrate anything. She was an engineer from a mid-range planet, and she was resting, and her rest was an event that could be measured on a seismograph. Torvald placed his palm flat on his desk. He felt the pulse. He counted 5 beats and then he stopped, because counting made it worse, and because he realized that the pulse would not stop. It would continue for as long as she was alive. Every human, everywhere, always. A species of 11 billion hearts, each one a minor geological event, beating in an uncoordinated, ceaseless, planet-shaking chorus. He thought about the title of his report. He had called it Strategic Reassessment, Human Biometrical Threat Profile. That was the Bureau's language, clean, categorical, institutional. But sitting in his quarters in the dark, feeling the human's heartbeat in his desk, Torvald knew what the report was actually about. It was about the thing that every species in the galaxy had been circling for 2 centuries without finding the words. It was not that humans were strong. Strength could be matched. It was not that they were violent. Violence could be met. It was not that they were clever or persistent or brave, though they were all of these things. It was that they did not know what they were. They walked across floors and did not notice the floors shaking. They spoke to each other and did not notice the walls vibrating. They slept and did not notice their hearts registering on seismographs 3 decks away. Every human alive was a localized seismic event in the shape of a person, and not one of them knew it, because on their homeworld, on that anvil of a planet where 11 billion hearts beat against the crust every second of every day, this was normal. They were not contained by their ignorance. They were amplified by it. A species that knew it was shaking the ground might learn to step lightly. A species that did not know could never be taught caution, because it did not know there was anything to be cautious about. Torvald removed his hand from the desk. He turned off his terminal. He lay down on his bunk and stared at the ceiling, and through the mattress, through the bunk frame, through the deck plating, he felt the pulse. Steady, relentless, the resting heartbeat of something that did not know it was terrifying. He did not sleep. In the morning, Commander Talo summoned him to the bridge. The Bureau had responded to his report. They wanted a full briefing. They were sending a delegation. 3 admirals, 2 senior analysts, and a threat classification review board. The delegation would arrive in 4 days. Talo asked Torvald what he intended to tell them. He said he intended to tell them the truth. And what is the truth, historian says? Torvald looked at the structural monitoring display on the bridge. The small, persistent vibration source on deck 14, the human, was moving. She had woken up. She was walking to the examination chamber for the morning's assessments. The display showed her as a pulsing point of light, radiating microseismic waves through the station with every step. The truth, Torvald said, is that we have spent 11 years telling ourselves that Ythori was a near-peer engagement and that our forces performed adequately against a comparable opponent. The truth is that the opponent was not comparable, and it was not performing. It was walking. We built our entire strategic posture around the performance of an enemy that was walking, Commander. Walking and talking and being bored. He paused. I intend to tell the admirals what I have told you, that humans do not know what they are, that their baseline biological functions exceed our engineering tolerances, that the ground shakes when they walk, the walls vibrate when they talk, and the decks fatigue when they sleep, that we classified them as a moderate threat because we measured their casual pace and mistook it for a sprint. He looked at the pulsing dot on the display. And I intend to recommend that under no circumstances, none, Commander, not border disputes, not trade negotiations, not diplomatic incidents, should the Confederacy take any action that would give 11 billion of them a reason to move faster than a walk. Talo was quiet for a long time. On the display, The dot that was Dr. Kira Vasquez reached the examination chamber and stopped. The pulsing continued, steady and patient, the resting rhythm of a geological event that had a name and liked her coffee black, and did not know that her morning stroll had just revised the strategic posture of an interstellar civilization. "I want that briefing rehearsed before the delegation arrives," Talo said finally. "Understood." And historian says, "Commander, recommend that they bring vibration-dampening equipment for the briefing room. If she walks past while the admirals are seated, I would rather they not feel it." Torvald almost smiled. He did not. "On reflection, Commander, I think they should feel it. I think that would be the most effective briefing I could possibly deliver." Talo looked at him. Then she looked at the dot on the screen, pulsing gently, shaking the station with the quiet, unconscious force of a single resting human. "Denied," she said. "I will not have 3 admirals filing medical reports for sensory distress because a human walked past a briefing room. Bring the dampeners." "Yes, Commander." He turned to leave. At the door he stopped. "For the record, Commander, the dampeners will reduce the vibration by approximately 80%. The remaining 20% will still be detectable by anyone with standard auricinid vibration palps." "I know. And for the record, she has asked twice now when she can leave. She says she has a contract to finish on a drilling platform in the Senar Reach. She is, she says, already a week late." "I know that too. She is not a weapon, Commander. She is not a soldier. She is a drilling engineer. And the thing that is shaking this station is the same thing that makes her good at her job. She works with tectonic forces for a living. She drills into planetary crusts. The vibrations she generates are not a threat display. They are a byproduct of being built for a world where the ground moves." Talo said nothing. "Humans come from a world where the ground moves, Commander. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tectonic shifts. They evolved on an unstable surface. Their bodies are built to generate, absorb, and survive forces that our species interprets as cataclysmic. We did not evolve this way. We evolved on stable worlds, in calm biomes, in environments where the ground was a constant. To us, a vibration is a warning. A tremor is a crisis. A quake is extinction." He looked at the dot one more time. "To them, it is the ground they walk on. They do not fear it. They do not notice it. They built their entire civilization on top of it." Talo was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Process her release paperwork. She leaves tomorrow on the regular courier, full diplomatic courtesy." Torvald turned back. "Commander." "She has been detained for 8 days without charge," historian says. "She is a civilian contractor who was interdicted at a border checkpoint. We have no legal basis to hold her, and based on your report, I am not confident we have the structural integrity to hold her much longer." A pause. "Process the release. Let her go back to her drilling platform. Let her do the thing she is good at, the thing that, as you have pointed out, involves driving equipment into the crust of a planet." "Yes, Commander." And historian says, "Commander, your briefing for the delegation. Prepare it as if the classification review will result in an immediate upgrade, because it will. I have read your report 3 times, and I intend to endorse every recommendation in it." Torvald nodded. He left the bridge. The delegation arrived 4 days later. 3 admirals, 2 senior strategic analysts, and a 12-member threat classification review board. They occupied the station's conference suite on Deck 8, 4 decks away from Medical Bay 7, behind the vibration-dampening barriers that Chief Engineer Ironik had installed over 3 sleepless nights. Dr. Vasquez had been released the day before. She had thanked Commander Talo, shaken hands with Chief Physician Sothen, who had flinched, involuntarily, at the contact, and walked to the docking bay with the unhurried stride of someone who had somewhere to be and was not particularly worried about getting there on time. The structural monitoring display on the bridge had tracked her as she moved through the station, each footstep a small pulse of light, each pulse fading slowly as the metal absorbed and dispersed the vibration. When she boarded the courier vessel and the docking clamps released, the seismograph in the geological survey lab fell silent for the first time in 8 days. Analyst Druhan stared at the flat, featureless waveform on his display and said nothing for a long time. Then he saved the last 8 days of continuous recording to a secure archive, labeled it baseline human BIOSEIMIC signature, single subject, resting state, and locked it. Torvald delivered the briefing on the morning of the delegation's arrival. He stood at the front of the conference suite, the dampening barriers humming faintly in the walls around him, and he presented the data. The cardiovascular output, the ground reaction forces, the seismograph classifications, the acoustic seismic hybrid events, the muscle tone readings, the structural fatigue analysis, the crew interviews, the Ithori cross-reference. He presented it the way a military historian was trained to present it: facts first, analysis second, recommendations last. The room was quiet throughout. Admiral Kareth Yuan, the senior member of the delegation, sat with all 4 hands folded on the table in front of her, her expression unreadable. The 2 junior admirals flanked her, their postures rigid. The review board members took notes on their datapads, and the soft clicking of their styluses against the screens was the only sound in the room besides Torvald's voice. He reached the Ithori section. He explained the sensor failures. He explained the communications degradation. He explained the sympathetic detonation incidents. He showed the field reports, the supply officer's fuse failures, the field medic's instrument drift, the 2-kilometer contamination radius. He explained that none of these failures had been caused by weapons or electronic countermeasures. He explained that they had been caused by walking. He showed the force measurement data. He showed the resonance profiles. He showed Ironix's corridor propagation map. He showed the floor plating fatigue analysis. He showed the water glass. He had asked Maintenance Chief Oris Pell for permission to include his observation about the water glass in the formal presentation. Pell had agreed. Torvald displayed the observation window footage on the conference suite's main screen. The recording showed Dr. Vasquez sitting on the examination platform, reading a datapad, completely still. On the table beside her, the glass of water rippled, in concentric circles, at 68 pulses per minute. Torvald let the footage play for 30 seconds without speaking. The room watched the water ripple. Then he said, the human's heart was moving the water in a glass 3 meters from her body. She did not know. She never noticed. In 8 days aboard this station, not once did she look at that glass and see what her heart was doing to it. Because on her homeworld, everything vibrates. Every surface, every structure, every glass of water on every table, all of it resonating with the heartbeats of 11 billion people. She cannot see it because she has never known a world where water is still. He paused. Our water is still, admirals. Our worlds are quiet. Our bodies do not shake the ground. We evolved in stability. We built our technology on the assumption of stability. Our sensors, our communications, our medical instruments, our weapons fuses, all of it was designed for a universe where the ground does not move unless something has gone catastrophically wrong. He looked at Admiral Yuan. Humans are the catastrophic wrong, not because they are hostile, not because they are aggressive, not because they intend harm, because they are built on a scale that treats our catastrophes as background noise. They do not mean to destabilize our equipment. They do not mean to overwhelm our sensors. They do not mean to fatigue our structural materials. They do not know they are doing any of these things, and that is the most important fact in this entire briefing. He let the silence hold. Then he delivered his final recommendation. I recommend that the Confederacy's threat classification for humans be revised from Category 4 to Category 9, not because they have demonstrated hostile intent, not because they have attacked us. But because their resting biological output exceeds the operational parameters of our military infrastructure, and because the gap between their resting output and their maximum output is unknown, and based on the data we have, terrifying. Admiral Yuan spoke for the first time. Category 9 has never been assigned to a biological species, historian says, only to Class III stellar phenomena and extinction-grade asteroid impacts. I am aware of that, Admiral. You are asking us to classify a species of bipedal omnivores at the same threat level as a supernova. Torvald thought about the water glass. He thought about the floor plating. He thought about the seismograph screaming on day 1 because a woman's heart was beating. Yes, Admiral, that is exactly what I am asking. Because the data supports it, and because I have spent my career studying the last days of civilizations that looked at data they did not want to believe and chose not to believe it. Yuan stared at him for a long time. Then she looked at the footage still playing on the screen, the water, rippling, in perfect time with a heartbeat that had left the station the day before but was still, somehow, present in the rhythm of the recording, in the memory of the metal, in the faint residual vibration that Ionic had measured in the deck plating of Medical Bay 6 hours after Dr. Vasquez departed. The metal remembered her. The station was still ringing, faintly, from 8 days of one human's resting heartbeat. Begin the reclassification process, Admiral Yuan said. Torvald nodded. He turned off the display. He gathered his notes. He left the conference suite and walked to his quarters on Deck 10, and he sat at his desk, and he placed his palm flat on its surface the way he had done every night since the human arrived. The desk was still. The pulse was gone. Dr. Kira Vasquez was somewhere in the Senar Reach by now, drilling into a planet's crust, doing the thing she had been built to do on the kind of world she had been built for, a world where the ground moved. The desk was still. And that stillness was the loudest thing Torvald had ever heard, because it was the shape of an absence, the negative space left behind by a heartbeat that his hands had learned to expect, and that his species had spent 2 centuries failing to understand. He opened a new document. He typed the title, Addendum to Strategic Reassessment, Implications for Long-Term Policy. He wrote 1 sentence and stopped. The sentence read, "The most dangerous thing about humans is not what they do when they are angry. It is what they do when they are at rest." He saved the file. He closed his terminal. He sat in the silence of a station that was, for the first time in 8 days, truly quiet, and understood in the marrow of his bones that the quiet was temporary, and that somewhere in the galaxy 11 billion hearts were beating, and the ground was shaking, and no one who mattered had noticed yet.